My director of operations found me backstage at 7:50 with her phone screen turned toward my face. "Your family?" she said. "There are 3 of them in the main hall, row 5. I looked at the screen, a photo she'd taken from the side aisle. My mother in a floral dress, sitting very still. My sister next to her, scanning the event program. And my brother, Dustin, with the expression of a man who just realized the name on the conference banner was the same name he'd been ignoring for 6 years. I hadn't spoken to any of them since I was 18 years old. My phone had 52 missed calls from Ohio area codes, all of them in the last 24 hours. I'd listened to every voicemail from start to finish that morning, sitting in my hotel room with the curtains still closed. Not one of them said, "I'm sorry." Every single one asked for the same thing. I looked at the banner stretched above the stage. Midwest Tech Summit, Columbus, Ohio. Keynote speaker, Valerie Madison, CEO and co-founder, Vantage Systems. My photo had been on the event website since January. The conference had been announced in November. They hadn't looked once. They only found me when I was 14 feet tall on a Highway 40. I handed my phone to my director and told her to hold it until I walked off that stage. Then I pulled back the curtain just enough to see the room. 400 seats. Journalists, investors, small business owners, city officials. And there, in the 5th row, stage left, 3 faces I hadn't seen in 6 years. My mother's hands were folded in her lap, but I could see from here that her knuckles were tight. Daisy was tilting her head toward Dustin, whispering something. Dustin was staring at the banner. I let the curtain fall and texted Eleanor. "They're here, all 3 of them." Her reply came in under a minute. "You've been ready for this for 6 years. Go." Before I tell you what happened on that stage, if you've ever been pushed out of your own family and had to build everything from the floor up, drop a "me" in the comments. This story is for you. My name is Valerie Madison. I'm 24 years old, and I'm the CEO and co-founder of Vantage Systems, a software automation company currently valued at $47 million. I built it with a borrowed laptop, $300 in savings, and a business partner I met at a public library in Columbus. I left Millford, Ohio at 18 years old with $180 in my pocket, a duffel bag, and a lie my sister told so convincingly that even my father believed it without asking a single question. For 6 years, I didn't look back. Then my brother drove past a billboard on the highway, pulled over on the shoulder, took a photo, and called my mother screaming. And after 6 years of complete silence, my family suddenly couldn't stop reaching out, not to apologize, not to explain, just making the same request over and over again. "We need your help." That's what this story is about. Let me back up and tell you what they never knew. Vantage Systems wasn't an accident. It was something I built in silence, the same way I did everything in the Madison house, carefully, completely, without anyone noticing. My co-founder Priya and I spent 14 months writing automation software for small businesses, inventory systems, scheduling tools, basic workflow automation for the kind of business owner working 16-hour days and still losing money to inefficiency. We bootstrapped entirely. No investors, no family money, no introductions. Our first client was a bakery in Columbus's Short North neighborhood that paid us $1,100 for a custom inventory system. We sat in Priya's car outside the bank and stared at the deposit receipt for a full minute before either of us said a word. By our second year, we had 12 clients. By our third, 40. By the time a regional business journal profiled Vantage Systems as one of the fastest growing tech startups in the Midwest, I was 23 years old and had been completely unreachable by my family for 5 years, and not one of them had once tried to find me. But here's what they definitely didn't know. 6 months before she passed, my grandmother Ruth Madison sat me down at her kitchen table in Millford and held my hands the way she did when she needed me to hear every single word. She told me she'd set aside an education fund for her grandchildren, $18,000 for each grandchild, separate accounts, separate signatures required. She looked me directly in the eyes and said, "That money is yours, sweetheart. Nobody touches it but you." Somebody touched it. I pieced the full story together years later through my great-aunt Frances, who'd been present at the meeting with Ruth's attorney and had kept her own copy of the original documents. The fund existed exactly as Ruth described. My signature was required to release it. And somewhere between my grandmother's funeral and my senior year of high school, someone forged that signature, consolidated both accounts, and redirected every cent. $18,000 that was supposed to cover my first 2 years of college, gone before I ever asked for it. When I asked my mother about it during senior year, she set her fork down with the particular patience she reserved for conversations she'd already decided I was wrong about. She said there was no fund. She said Grandma Ruth sometimes said things that weren't entirely accurate near the end. She said I was looking for reasons to cause problems. What she didn't know was that I'd been keeping records since I was 17. A notebook in my locker, then my bag, then a box under my bed. Dates, amounts, exact words, screenshots of texts. Not because I had a plan, because when you grow up as the person everyone blames, you learn early that memory alone isn't enough. You need something you can hold in your hands. They had no idea how long I'd been paying attention. The Madison family had a clear hierarchy, and I understood it by the time I was 10 years old. Daisy's 16th birthday cost $4,200. I know this because I found the receipt in my mother's desk drawer when I was looking for a pen 2 days before the party. Rented venue, catered food, a DJ, a custom cake from the bakery on Main Street, a photo booth, and a playlist my mother had spent a week curating. 17 of Daisy's closest friends attended. My mother had been planning it since the previous summer. My 16th birthday fell on a Tuesday in March. I came downstairs to find a card on the kitchen table, a generic one, the kind sold in a 3-pack at the dollar store. It was signed by my mother only. Not my father, not Dustin, not Daisy, just Donna's signature in blue pen. That evening, I worked a 4-hour catering shift because the regular assistant had called out sick and my mother needed the coverage. I carried trays at someone else's anniversary party and came home at 10:30 with $40 and a slice of leftover cake someone had boxed up for me. Nobody asked how my birthday was. Nobody noticed I'd been gone. I'm not telling you this to make you feel sorry for me. I'm telling you because it's important to understand that what happened when I was 18 wasn't a single explosion. It was the logical conclusion of a pattern that had been running since I was a child. Daisy mattered. I was useful. Those are two completely different things, and I'd known the difference for years. The spring I was 17, Daisy was dating a guy named Marcus. He was 20, drove a black Jeep, and had the specific confidence of someone who'd never once been told no by anyone who mattered. I was home alone on the Friday afternoon in April when he knocked on the front door. He said Daisy had asked him to stop by, that he'd text her when he got there. He came inside and sat down on the couch. When I came back from the kitchen, he put his hand on my arm and said something I won't repeat here. I stepped back. I told him to leave. He laughed, the kind of laugh that means he wasn't taking me seriously, and then I picked up my phone. He left before I finished styling. I told Daisy that evening, every detail, start to finish, exactly as it happened. She listened without interrupting. When I finished, she was quiet for about 5 seconds. Then she went to my mother and told her that I had been flirting with Marcus, that I'd been texting him, that I'd invited him over specifically because I knew she'd be at work. I found out when I walked into the kitchen and found my mother waiting. Donna Madison, when she had decided something was true, had a specific kind of stillness. She didn't yell. She sat with her hands folded on the table and spoke in a low, certain voice that was worse than yelling because it carried no doubt whatsoever. She told me I was jealous of my sister. She said she'd always known it. She told me what I'd done was a betrayal of this family. I tried to explain what actually happened. She talked over me. I tried again. She stood up and said she didn't want to hear another word. My father was in the living room during the entire conversation. He didn't come into the kitchen once. Dustin watched from the doorway and said nothing. For 3 weeks after that, I slept in the basement. Not officially. Donna didn't announce a punishment. The house just rearranged itself. My room was suddenly where Daisy needed quiet to study. The basement had a cot, a space heater, and one strip of afternoon light from a small window above the floor. I ate after everyone else. I washed my own dishes. I stopped existing in that house as anything other than a presence that people worked around. That was the moment I stopped expecting anything from any of them. Senior year. I'd been accepted to Ohio State's engineering program with a partial scholarship, $2,200 short of covering my first year. I'd been working weekends at a grocery store on 5th Street since junior year, saving everything I could. I had $1,100. I was still short. I thought about the education fund. I asked my mother one evening after dinner. Not confrontational, just a question. I said I remembered what Grandma Ruth had told me, and I was wondering if any of that money was still available. The table went very quiet. My mother set her fork down with the slow patience she deployed when she was about to explain something she considered obvious. She said there was no fund. She said my grandmother had made promises she couldn't keep near the end of her life. She said I was trying to cause problems right before graduation. She said it all smoothly, without a crack, the way someone speaks when they've rehearsed the answer. Daisy didn't say a word at dinner that night, but after I went to my room, she went to my mother. I don't know exactly what she said. I only know the result. The next morning, February 9th, 19 degrees, sky the color of concrete, I came downstairs to find a duffel bag sitting on the front porch. My winter coat was folded on top of it. The front door was locked from the inside. I knocked again. My mother came to the door, looked through the storm glass, and said, "You don't live here anymore." I stood there long enough that I should have cried. I didn't. Something shifted inside me that I can only describe as a door closing. Not slamming, just closing, very quietly, from the inside. I had $180 from my last 2 grocery store shifts. I called a friend from school who let me sleep on her couch for a week. Then I bought a Greyhound ticket. Furthest I could get for what I had was Columbus, Ohio. I left Millford on February 10th without telling anyone I was going. There was nobody to tell. Columbus in February is not a gentle city. I found a room in a shared house on the east side through a Craigslist post, started waitressing at a diner on my second week, and spent my evenings watching free coding tutorials on my phone propped against a coffee mug. I didn't have a clear plan. I just knew the only thing my family had never been able to take from me was the way my brain worked, and I intended to use it. The house had 4 tenants. One of them was Eleanor Voss. Eleanor was 68 years old, recently widowed, and a retired computer science professor from Ohio State who had decided she didn't want a big empty house in Bexley and had moved into the shared place on a whim her adult children considered completely insane. She had 2 cats, a collection of cardigan sweaters that could fill a closet on their own, and a habit of making strong coffee at 10 in the evening and sitting at the kitchen table with whatever she was reading. The first time she really noticed me, I was at that same table at 11 at night, squinting at a Python tutorial on my phone screen. She sat down across from me without asking, looked at the screen, and said, "You're teaching yourself on a 4-inch screen. That's either real dedication or a vision problem." "Both," I said. She went to her room and came back with the laptop. Older model, fully functional, completely hers. She set it in front of me and said, "Use this. I'll want it back when you no longer need it, which, based on what I've already seen of you, will be a while." I didn't cry in front of her. I waited until I was in my room, but when I cried for a long time. Eleanor didn't treat me like a project. She didn't ask about my family, didn't push for my history, didn't require me to be broken in order to receive her help. She treated me exactly the way I'd spent my whole childhood wanting to be treated, like someone whose work spoke for itself. When I showed her the first version of the inventory software Priya and I had built, she read through the code for 20 minutes without a word. Then she said, "The logic here is very clean. You've got something." She came to our first public pitch competition, not a university event, just an open startup pitch at a co-working space in the Short North. Priya and I had practiced our 3-minute presentation until we could deliver it without thinking. We placed second. The first place team had a faculty advisor, a university lab, and 3 years of institutional support behind them. Eleanor was waiting by the door when we came off the stage. She hugged me before I could say anything. Then she said the 3 words I'd been waiting to hear from someone for 18 years. "I'm proud of you." I'd heard those words before, from a teacher once, a coach in middle school, but Eleanor said them with her hands on my shoulders, in a room full of strangers after I'd just spent 3 months building something from zero. And she said them like they were simply true, not a consolation, not encouragement designed to manage my expectations, just a fact. When Priya and I incorporated Vantage Systems, I listed Eleanor as founding mentor in the company documentation. She found out when she saw the paperwork. She called me into the kitchen that evening, sat down at the table, and said my name once. Then she pressed her lips together and looked at the ceiling for a long moment. Then she said, "Your grandmother raised someone remarkable." She'd never met Ruth, but she knew exactly what to say. For the first time in my life, I understood that family isn't the people who have to stay. It's the people who choose to show up. 6 years of complete silence. I didn't check their social media. I didn't drive through Millford on business. I didn't send birthday cards or Christmas messages. I wasn't cruel about it. I was just finished. When you spent 18 years absorbing every blame and filling every silence, not reacting becomes the most radical thing you can do. Vantage Systems have been growing steadily. 4th year, a regional profile, a team of 11, and a partnership with a retail chain that wanted to roll out our inventory system across 42 locations. The marketing campaign for the partnership included outdoor advertising. Our agency suggested Highway 40 for high visibility. I approved the placement without thinking about Millford. The billboard went up in September, 14 feet tall, full color. My photo, my name, the Vantage Systems logo, and the tagline, "Building Smarter Businesses from the Ground Up." Eastbound side, 3 miles from the Millford exit. Dustin was driving home from a shift when he saw it. He pulled over on the shoulder, took a photo on his phone, and called my mother. I know this because he mentioned it in a voicemail, casually, like he was sharing a fun story. He said he almost swerved. He said he couldn't believe it. He said, "Mom, you need to see this. She's like a big deal now." 6 years of silence, not a single text, not a call, not a card. And then one billboard. Within 24 hours, 52 missed calls. My mother, my father, Daisy, Dustin, and numbers I didn't recognize. I listened to every voicemail from start to finish. Donna's voice had that specific sweetness she applied when she needed something. Warm, high, maternal on the surface, and hollow underneath. Dustin was casual, like we'd spoken last week. Daisy was breezy. Denzel was brief and uncomfortable, the verbal equivalent of a man staring at his shoes. Not one of them said, "I'm sorry." Not one said, "I missed you," or "I was wrong," or "I've thought about what I did." Every voicemail, every single one, asked for help. Different tones, different words, different levels of desperation, but always the same 2 words underneath everything. They saw a billboard and thought it was an ATM. I set my phone to do not disturb. I didn't block anyone. Blocking felt like a reaction, and I was done reacting to the Madison family. I had a keynote speech to prepare. I had a conference in Columbus in 6 days, and I had no idea they were planning to be in that room. I stepped out from behind the curtain and walked to the podium at 7:58. The spotlight hit me, and for 1 second, I was 18 years old again, standing in the kitchen while my mother talked over me, and my father stayed in the living room, and my sister looked at the table, and my brother watched from the doorway and said nothing. Then I looked out at the audience. 400 seats, most of them full. And there, in the 5th row, stage left, 3 faces I hadn't seen in 6 years. My mother's expression when she recognized me is something I'll carry for the rest of my life. Not as a trophy, just as information, because in that single second, I watched the story she'd been telling for 6 years collapse behind her eyes. Her mouth opened, closed, opened again. Her hands went to the edge of her chair. Even in shock, her first instinct was to scan the room, managing her audience before she'd finished processing what she was seeing. Some things don't change. I adjusted the microphone and began. 20 minutes on technology, automation, and small business infrastructure. Specific, data-driven, and polished. The keynote I'd delivered a dozen times, the one I could give in my sleep. I watched the room engage. I watched heads nod, phones come out to take notes, people lean forward in their chairs. I watched my brother stare at me with the expression of a man who once dismissed someone win something he didn't know was a competition. And then, near the end, I shifted. I said I grew up in a small town in Ohio. I said I left that town at 18 years old with less than $200 and no safety net, no family money, no cosigner, no one to call in an emergency. I said the company I built wasn't funded by investors who believed in me or by relatives who opened doors. It was funded by a refusal to accept that my value was something other people got to decide. I said, the most efficient systems are the ones built by people who understand what it costs when a system fails them. I know exactly what that cost is. I built Vantage Systems so that other people don't have to pay it alone. I paused for 3 seconds and let the silence do the work. When I stepped off that stage, the room stood up. My mother did not stand. She sat perfectly still with her napkin clenched in both hands and a smile bolted onto her face with the urgency of someone who'd installed it in the last 30 seconds. The people at her table were on their feet, applauding, glancing sideways at her in the specific way that people do when they've just realized something they can't unknow. She came to me during the networking portion. I'd expected it. She moved through the crowd with purpose, arms already opening when she got close enough. "Valerie, sweetheart, what a wonderful surprise. Why didn't you tell us you were coming?" I didn't step into the hug. I said, "You had my number, Mom. 6 years." Her smile flickered. She lowered her voice. "That speech of yours, people are going to think..." I didn't name anyone. If people drew conclusions, that's not my responsibility. Daisy appeared at her shoulder. She said we needed to talk, that things were complicated, that she'd been meaning to reach out. I told her I'd received 52 calls in 24 hours and not one apology. "That's not family reaching out," I said. "That's a collection call." My father materialized behind them, staring at the floor. Denzel, who had sat in the living room while my mother locked me out of the house in February, who hadn't called once in 6 years, who'd watched it all from a safe, comfortable distance for 18 years before that. He said my name once, quietly, and then said nothing else, which was, I realized, the most honest thing he'd ever done. Dustin stayed near the far end of the room. We made eye contact once. He looked away first. I nodded to the event coordinator, straightened my jacket, and walked toward the side exit. No running, no slamming. I'd done enough of that when I was 18. That night, from my hotel room in Columbus, I wrote one email, 4 recipients: my mother, my father, Daisy, Dustin. I wrote that I wasn't co-signing any loans, sending money, or funding anyone's ideas. I wrote that if any of them wanted a real relationship with me, it wouldn't start with a voicemail asking for help. It would start with an honest conversation, someone naming what actually happened and saying it out loud. The fund, the lie about Marcus, the locked door in February, not "we did our best," not "that's in the past," a specific apology. I pressed send and closed the laptop. Vantage Systems ended the year with $52 million in active contracts. I launched an internal scholarship program for first-generation college employees, funded personally, named the Ruth Madison Fellowship, after my grandmother. Eleanor was in the front row at the announcement. She had her pearls on. Donna never replied to the email. Daisy didn't either. Dustin sent a text 3 weeks later. "Sorry. No punctuation. No follow-up." I read it and set the phone down. I'm still deciding what to do with it. My father sent a handwritten letter 6 weeks after Columbus. He said he was sorry, not for Donna, for himself, for every time he stayed in the living room, for every time he told me "don't upset your mother," when he should have told her to stop. It was the first true thing any Madison had ever said to me directly. Too late to change anything, but not nothing. I live in Columbus now. Priya and Eleanor come to Sunday dinner most weeks. The table seats 6 and it's usually full. The wine is never expensive. Nobody here is performing for anyone. If you're still listening, if you recognize any of this, I want you to hear something directly. You're not ungrateful. You're not dramatic. You're not the problem. Those words, the ones they throw at you when you stop shrinking, are the sound of people losing control of a story they never had the right to tell in the first place. My family said "help me" 52 times in 24 hours. The 2 words I needed were "I'm sorry." They're not the same sentence, and you don't know anyone the first until someone's given you the second. The bravest thing I ever did wasn't leaving Millford with $180 in the middle of February. It was refusing to come back on their terms. Blood made them relatives. It never once made them family. If this story meant something to you, leave a comment. What would your family have said if they found you after years of silence? "Help me" or "I'm sorry"? I read every single one.